June 1966. A 15-year-old boy named Peter Fries lies on a cold stone floor deep inside an abandoned World War II bunker near Langenberg, Germany. His wrists and ankles are bound with rope. The only light comes from a single candle burning on a concrete ledge. Water drips from the walls. The air smells of damp earth and rust. Hours have passed since the man who brought him here left, promising to return soon. Peter knows with absolute certainty that if he doesn't escape, he will die in this underground tomb. Earlier that day, everything seemed normal. Peter left a public swimming pool in Wuppertal, Elberfeld, and was walking home when a neatly dressed young man approached him on the street. The man was polite, friendly, maybe 20 years old. He introduced himself as Jürgen and started talking about local history and the war. Then he mentioned something that caught Peter's attention: a secret bunker from World War II where old military equipment had been left behind. Helmets, maybe weapons, things most people didn't know about. Did Peter want to see it? It sounded like an adventure, not a trap. They took a bus together to Langenberg, chatting casually. They walked from the bus stop along a path that led away from houses, up a wooded hillside. Jürgen pushed aside overgrown bushes to reveal a narrow entrance carved into the earth. Cool air flowed from inside. They stepped into the darkness. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately. Jürgen lit a candle and began showing Peter around, pointing out features of the construction, explaining how people sheltered here during air raids. His voice echoed off the concrete walls. Then, without warning, everything changed. Jürgen attacked. Within minutes, Peter was on the floor, rope cutting into his wrists and ankles. Jürgen told him to stay quiet, that he would be back, and then walked out, taking the flashlight, but leaving the candle burning. The metal door clanged shut. Peter was alone. Now, lying in the darkness, Peter makes a decision. He will not wait to die. He begins dragging himself across the rough stone floor toward the candle. The rope cuts deeper into his skin with every movement. It takes several agonizing minutes to reach the ledge. He twists his body and holds his bound wrists directly over the flame. The synthetic rope begins to melt immediately. The heat is unbearable. His skin burns, blisters form, the smell of charred flesh fills the air. Every instinct screams at him to pull away. He doesn't. He understands that this pain is the only thing that will save his life. He keeps the rope steady in the flame, watching the fibers blacken and weaken. Finally, the rope snaps. His hands are free. Peter quickly unties his ankles with trembling, burned fingers. He grabs the candle and begins searching for the exit. The bunker has multiple chambers and passages. He tries one corridor. It ends in a wall. He tries another. The candle flame flickers dangerously in the drafts. If it goes out, he'll be trapped in total darkness. Finally, he sees the heavy metal door. He pushes it open and stumbles into a sloping passage. At the end, he can see faint evening light. He drops the candle and runs toward it, bursting out of the bunker entrance and down the hillside toward the lights of houses. He doesn't stop running until he reaches people and safety. When police enter that bunker hours later, following Peter's precise directions, they find far more than evidence of one attack. Inside the cold underground chambers, hidden in deeper sections that require crawling through narrow passages to reach, they discover the dismembered remains of 4 children: Klaus Jung, 8 years old; Peter Fuchs, 13; Ulrich Kalweis, 12; Manfred Grassmann, 12. 4 boys who vanished from fairgrounds across the region over the previous 4 years. 4 families who never stopped searching. But the most terrifying part of this story isn't what happened in that bunker between 1962 and 1966. It's what happened 5 years earlier, in June 1961, when a father named Reinhard Beck walked into a police station and filed a detailed complaint about a 15-year-old boy named Jürgen Bartsch, who had attacked his son in a bunker. A complaint that was documented, filed away, and forgotten. A warning that, if properly investigated, would have saved 4 innocent lives. To understand how Jürgen Bartsch became a killer, you must start at the beginning. November 6, 1946. In the devastated city of Essen, Germany, just 18 months after World War II ended, an unmarried woman gives birth to a son. She names him Karl-Heinz Sadrowzinski. The country around them is still clearing rubble from Allied bombing campaigns. Millions are displaced, hungry, struggling to survive. In this chaotic post-war world, the woman makes a decision. She cannot or will not keep the child. Within days, she gives him up. She dies of tuberculosis 5 months later. For the first 11 months of his life, the infant Karl-Heinz remains under the care of nurses in institutional settings. He never experiences the consistent warmth of a mother's embrace, never forms the fundamental attachment bond that psychologists consider essential for healthy emotional development. He is passed through sterile environments where his basic physical needs are met, but emotional connection is completely absent. At 11 months old, a butcher named Gerhard Bartsch and his wife adopt the child through legal channels. They rename him Jürgen Bartsch, erasing even his birth name. The family lives in Langenberg, a small working-class town in North Rhine-Westphalia. Gerhard runs a butcher shop on the main street that provides a modest but stable income. The family is respectable, rigidly church-going, well-regarded by neighbors. On paper, young Jürgen has been rescued from institutional care and given a stable home. But years later, when psychiatrists conduct extensive interviews with the adult Jürgen Bartsch, he describes a very different reality. His adoptive mother suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder and was fixated on cleanliness. He was not permitted to play with other children lest he become dirty. He describes harsh punishments, being locked in the dark basement of the butcher shop among hanging animal carcasses for minor infractions, enduring beatings in the same room where his father cut up meat, never feeling wanted or loved. This continued into adulthood. His mother personally bathed him until he was 19 years old. Whether Jürgen's accounts are entirely accurate or colored by later self-justification remains debated among experts. Some psychiatrists believe his descriptions, noting they fit patterns seen in other cases of severe attachment disorders. Others suggest he exaggerates to position himself as a victim rather than a perpetrator. What cannot be disputed is that his childhood was profoundly unhappy and marked by emotional deprivation. When Jürgen is 10 years old, his adoptive parents send him away to Catholic boarding schools. The stated reason is that he needs discipline, structure, and religious education. But the psychological effect is devastating. Adopted to escape institutional care, he is immediately returned to institutional life. He spends several years in boarding schools, sleeping in dormitories with other boys, following rigid schedules, returning to Langenberg only for brief holidays. What happens during those years at Catholic boarding schools remains partially obscured. Jürgen later claims he suffered sexual abuse from a teacher when he was 13 years old and brutal physical punishments. Some psychiatric experts who examine him believe these experiences fundamentally damaged his developing sexuality, creating twisted associations between violence, control, and sexual arousal. Other experts are more skeptical, noting that abuse claims are common among violent offenders seeking sympathy. The truth likely lies somewhere between. What remains undisputed is that Jürgen emerges from these years as a profoundly disturbed adolescent with severe psychological problems that nobody recognizes or addresses. By his early teenage years, when he returns to live with the Bartsch family and begins an apprenticeship in his adoptive father's butcher shop, he has become extraordinarily skilled at hiding his inner turmoil behind a mask of normalcy. Outwardly, he appears perfectly ordinary, polite, well-mannered, neatly dressed, respectful to adults. He attends church services every Sunday without complaint. He helps customers in the butcher shop with a friendly smile, making appropriate small talk. He learns the butcher's trade, becoming skilled with knives, comfortable handling blood and raw meat, familiar with animal anatomy. Neighbors see a quiet, somewhat withdrawn young man who causes no trouble. But inside, something dark is growing. Jürgen begins spending his free time exploring the abandoned bunkers and air raid shelters that dot the landscape around Langenberg. These underground structures were built during World War II to protect civilians from Allied bombing raids. After 1945, they were forgotten and left to decay. Their entrances became overgrown with vegetation. Local children sometimes play in them, but for Jürgen, these places represent something else entirely. Private spaces where he can be alone with his increasingly disturbing fantasies. He spends hours exploring the bunkers, learning their layouts, memorizing every passage and chamber. June 1961. Jürgen Bartsch is 14 years old, about to turn 15. He has already begun acting on his darkest urges. He has developed a method. Approach younger boys in public places, strike up friendly conversations, and tell them about abandoned bunkers where military equipment from the war can still be found. Most boys decline or bring friends along, but occasionally one agrees to go alone. One such boy is the 12-year-old son of Reinhard Beck, a house painter who lives in Velbert, a town near Langenberg. Jürgen approaches him, tells him about a bunker filled with wartime artifacts, and suggests they explore it together. The boy, curious and not sensing danger from someone only a few years older, agrees. Jürgen leads him to an abandoned air raid shelter on a hillside. Once inside, completely alone and away from any potential witnesses, Jürgen attacks him. The exact details of what happens will never be fully revealed in public records, but the attack is serious enough that when the boy returns home shaken and injured, his father's response is immediate. Reinhard Beck goes straight to the police station in Velbert the next morning and files a formal complaint. This is not a parent overreacting to rough play. Beck provides specific, actionable information. The attacker's name is Jürgen Bartsch. Here is where his family lives. Here is the location of the bunker. Here is what he did to my son. Beck wants the police to investigate and prevent this teenager from harming other children. The Velbert police take the complaint seriously enough to bring 15-year-old Jürgen in for questioning. He arrives at the station with his adoptive father Gerhard, who is shocked by the accusation. Jürgen sits in the interrogation room, maintaining his characteristically polite demeanor. He doesn't deny going to the bunker with Beck's son. Instead, he provides an alternative explanation. They were just wrestling around, playing rough the way boys do. It got a bit out of hand, but it was all just horseplay, a misunderstanding. The police officers face a difficult decision. On one side, they have a father's complaint and a child's testimony about an attack. On the other, they have a clean-cut teenager from a respectable local family with no prior criminal record, offering a benign explanation. The physical evidence is ambiguous. There are injuries, but they could plausibly result from rough play. There are no witnesses. The police classify the incident as minor assault under German law. They file a report, but don't pursue serious charges. More critically, they don't search the bunker. They don't investigate Bartsch's background beyond confirming basic details. They don't contact the boarding schools he attended. They don't consult with psychologists. They treat it as an isolated incident between boys, worthy of a warning, but not serious intervention. After several months, the case is quietly closed. Jürgen Bartsch receives no consequences, no counseling, no monitoring. This moment represents one of the most catastrophic failures in the case. If the police had taken Beck's complaint more seriously, if someone had thoroughly investigated, if the bunker had been searched and Bartsch had been psychologically evaluated, 4 children would still be alive. A single decision to dig deeper rather than file the complaint away would have changed everything. But the warning goes unheeded. The file is stamped closed and archived, and Jürgen Bartsch learns the most dangerous lesson a budding predator can learn. He can do this and get away with it. By early 1962, Jürgen has completed his apprenticeship and works as a qualified butcher in his adoptive father's shop. He is skilled with knives, comfortable with blood, familiar with anatomy from cutting up carcasses. Customers find him pleasant and helpful. Nobody suspects what occupies his mind during these routine transactions. He has refined his hunting strategy. He realizes that approaching boys in his own small town carries too much risk of recognition. He needs places where he's anonymous, where families are distracted, where a friendly stranger can talk to a child without raising immediate suspicion. The answer? Fairgrounds, the traditional German parish fairs that travel throughout the densely populated Ruhr region. These traveling fairs transform town squares and parks into temporary wonderlands of carousels, game booths, shooting galleries, and food stands. The atmosphere is festive and relaxed. Parents often sit at beer gardens watching from a distance, while children wander freely between attractions. The crowds, noise, and constant movement create perfect cover. A clean-cut young man can strike up a conversation with a boy standing alone near an attraction without attracting attention. Jürgen's approach is carefully calibrated. He mentions something interesting nearby that most people don't know about. A real bunker from the war, with equipment still inside. Sometimes he tells them he works as a detective or for an insurance company, that he needs a witness to recover something from the tunnel. He offers them money. He frames it as an adventure, not a threat. The key is appearing completely normal and trustworthy, like a friendly older brother rather than a predator. He learns to read which children are vulnerable, which are too cautious, which parents are paying close attention. Just a few kilometers from various fairground locations stands his carefully prepared killing place, the abandoned air raid shelter that doubles as an old mine tunnel near Langenberg. Its entrance is overgrown and difficult to spot unless you know exactly where to look. Inside, the shelter consists of several connected chambers with concrete walls and ceilings. Bartsch has explored every passage, knows every turn, has made this underground space his own. March 31st, 1962, 8-year-old Klaus Jung disappears from a parish fair. His parents search frantically. Police launch a massive operation involving dozens of officers and community volunteers. They comb nearby forests, check water bodies, interview fairground workers. Klaus's photograph appears in newspapers with desperate appeals from his parents. Days turn to weeks. The boy is never found. The case grows cold. What his family doesn't know is that Klaus's body lies in an underground bunker just kilometers from where he disappeared. August 6, 1965. 13-year-old Peter Fuchs vanishes. The pattern repeats: frantic search, police operation, media coverage, fading hope. The investigation produces nothing. Peter Fuchs joins Klaus Jung in the statistics of missing children. Police don't connect the two cases. Each is treated as separate. August 14, 1965. Just 8 days later, 12-year-old Ulrich Kahlweiss disappears. This is a dangerous choice. Another victim so quickly, but perhaps that's part of the escalating compulsion. Witnesses later report seeing Ulrich talking with a young man who seemed friendly, not threatening. He was well-dressed and clean-cut. Then both disappeared. Ulrich never returns home. Another massive search, another investigation that stalls. May 6, 1966. 12-year-old Manfred Grassmann becomes the fourth victim. By now, parents in the region are becoming nervous about fairs. Some families avoid them entirely, but most people still believe their community is safe, that these disappearances are tragic but isolated incidents. The police have 4 missing boys now: Klaus Jung, Peter Fuchs, Ulrich Kahlweiss, and Manfred Grassmann. 4 separate investigations producing no results. What police don't know is that Bartsch later estimated he attempted to kill more than 100 times. Most attempts failed because boys refused his invitation, brought friends, or circumstances weren't right. Only 4 succeeded. The 4 dead boys represent a tiny fraction of his attempts over the years, and through it all, Jürgen Bartsch continues his normal life. He works in the butcher shop, serves customers, attends church. He even joins crowds of onlookers when police search areas where children disappeared, standing there quietly, watching and listening, then going home as if nothing concerns him. June 18, 1966. Peter Fries, 15 years old, leaves a public swimming pool in Wuppertal, Elberfeld. A young man approaches him on the street. He's neatly dressed, polite, friendly. He introduces himself as Jürgen and starts talking. He mentions a secret bunker from the war with military equipment inside. Would Peter like to see it? It sounds interesting, not dangerous. Peter agrees. They take a bus together toward Langenberg, chatting casually about school and summer weather. They walk from the bus stop along a path leading away from houses, up a wooded hillside. Jürgen pushes aside branches to reveal a narrow entrance. Cool air flows from inside. They step into the darkness. Inside, Jürgen lights a candle and begins showing Peter around, talking about how people sheltered here during air raids, pointing out features of the construction. His voice echoes off the concrete. Then everything changes. Jürgen attacks without warning. Peter fights back, but within minutes he finds himself on the cold floor with rope wrapped around his wrists and ankles. Jürgen tells him to stay quiet, that he'll be back. Then Jürgen does something unexpected. Because Peter had expressed fear of being alone in the dark, Jürgen leaves the candle burning. It's an act that will save Peter's life. The metal door clangs shut. Peter is alone. But Peter Fries is different from the others. He's slightly older, perhaps more resourceful, perhaps just lucky. He makes the decision to use the candle to burn through his bindings. The pain is excruciating. His skin burns and blisters, but he doesn't stop. The rope snaps. He frees himself, finds the exit through the dark passages, and runs until he reaches houses and people. For the first time in 5 years, someone has escaped from Jürgen Bartsch, and this time, the survivor can lead police directly to the killer's lair. Police follow Peter's directions to the bunker. They enter with flashlights and evidence collection equipment. They find the cut rope and candle remains, confirming Peter's story. Then they find children's clothing that doesn't belong to Peter, items that belong to other boys. As they explore deeper into the connected chambers, they make the discovery that will shock Germany: human remains. Over the following days, forensic teams work under difficult conditions in the underground chambers. They recover and identify the dismembered remains of 4 boys: Klaus Jung, Peter Fuchs, Ulrich Kalweis, and Manfred Grassmann. The bodies had been decapitated, dismembered, with eyes pricked out and genitals removed. The 4 missing children whose families have waited years for answers. The news explodes across Germany. Television stations interrupt programming with breaking news. Der Spiegel assigns reporters to cover every angle. The small town of Langenberg finds itself thrust into the national spotlight. Police establish a command post near the bunker. The hillside becomes an active crime scene, cordoned off with tape, guarded around the clock. Forensic teams work in shifts, documenting everything. Crowds gather at the police barriers. Television crews set up cameras. Journalists interview anyone willing to talk. Among the onlookers stands a middle-aged man staring at the bunker entrance with particular intensity. His name is Reinhard Beck, the house painter who filed a police complaint 5 years earlier. He has been following the news since the first reports. Now he stands here scanning faces in the crowd, looking for someone specific. Beck's eyes move from person to person. Then he sees him, a young man in his early 20s, neatly dressed, standing calmly among the crowd as if this tragedy has nothing to do with him. Beck recognizes that face immediately. It's slightly older, but unmistakable. Jürgen Bartsch, the teenager who attacked his son in 1961, the one the police questioned and released. Beck doesn't hesitate. He pushes through the crowd to the nearest police officer and points directly at Bartsch. "That's him," he says. "That's the man who attacked my son 5 years ago in a bunker just like this one. I filed a report. The police have it on record." Multiple officers move through the crowd toward Bartsch. He doesn't run. He doesn't resist. When they ask him to come with them for questioning, he simply nods and goes, still maintaining that same polite demeanor. In June 1966, Jürgen Bartsch is arrested. At the police station, detectives place 19-year-old Jürgen Bartsch in an interrogation room. He sits calmly, hands folded on the table. They begin with basic questions. Where do you live? What do you do for work? Do you know Peter Friese? Have you been to the bunker? Bartsch answers directly. Yes, he knows the bunker. Yes, he was there recently with a boy. He speaks without emotion, as if discussing routine matters. The detectives exchange glances. This isn't how guilty people usually behave. Then they show him photographs of 4 missing boys and ask, "Do you know Klaus Jung, Peter Fuchs, Ulrich Kalweis, Manfred Grassmann?" At each name, Bartsch's expression doesn't change. After a long pause, he begins to talk. Over the next several hours, Jürgen Bartsch confesses openly to 4 murders. He describes his method with clinical precision, approaching boys at fairgrounds, gaining their trust with stories about being a detective or insurance worker, offering them money, leading them to the bunker, attacking them once isolated. He provides details only the killer would know, what each boy was wearing, what they talked about, how they reacted. He admits to beating and strangling them, to dismembering the bodies afterward, to decapitating them, to removing eyes and genitals. He describes reaching orgasm while cutting the flesh after their deaths. The confession is comprehensive and chilling in its complete lack of remorse or emotion. The trial begins in late 1967 at the Landgericht Wuppertal. Public interest reaches unprecedented levels. People queue through the night for courtroom seats. Germany hasn't seen a trial like this in the post-war era. The prosecution presents overwhelming evidence: Peter Fries's testimony, forensic evidence from the bunker, Bartsch's detailed confession. The factual guilt is not in dispute. The defense focuses on his mental state and diminished capacity. They present his troubled childhood, abandoned at birth, mother died of tuberculosis, 11 months in institutional care, emotionally withdrawn adoptive mother with OCD who bathed him until 19, sent to boarding schools, alleged sexual abuse by a teacher. They argue he was driven by compulsions he couldn't control. Prosecution psychiatrists counter that Bartsch planned carefully, maintained a normal facade for years, and demonstrated rational thinking. He understood his actions were wrong. He is dangerous, calculating, and fully responsible. December 15, 1967. The verdict is guilty on all counts. The sentence, life imprisonment. The case appears closed, but Bartsch's defense attorneys appeal to Germany's Federal Court of Justice. Their argument: Bartsch committed his first murder on March 31, 1962, when he was 15 years old, making him a juvenile offender who should have been tried under juvenile criminal law, which emphasizes rehabilitation. In 1971, the federal court returns the case to the Landgericht Düsseldorf for retrial under juvenile law. Public outrage erupts. How can a serial killer benefit from protections designed for teenagers? But the law is clear, and the retrial proceeds. This decision marked a turning point in German forensic psychiatry. For the first time, a court was required to consider specialist statements about mental states in relation to sexual drive abnormalities, not just general psychiatry. In 1971, the Juvenile Chamber delivers the new verdict: 10 years imprisonment under Juvenile Criminal Code, followed by indefinite placement in a secure psychiatric facility. Bartsch is transferred to Eichelborn State Hospital in Lippstadt, where he will remain under supervision and treatment for as long as experts deem him dangerous to society. Years pass in Eichelborn. Bartsch participates in psychiatric treatment programs and corresponds extensively with journalists and psychologists who study his case. On January 2, 1974, while still confined in the psychiatric hospital, he marries Gisela Deike, a physically disabled nursing assistant from Hanover who had written letters to him. He becomes fixated on one idea: that surgical castration might eliminate his dangerous sexual impulses. Initially, he vehemently refused any surgery, fearing for his health. But facing the prospect of lifetime incarceration and continued torment from his compulsions, his position changes. He begins petitioning repeatedly for permission, arguing that this operation could free him from what he calls his cursed desires and allow his eventual release. After extensive debate about the ethics and potential effectiveness of the procedure, authorities eventually grant permission. April 28, 1976, Jürgen Bartsch, now 29 years old, undergoes voluntary surgical castration at the Eichelborn facility. This is about 10 years after his incarceration, 2 years after his marriage. During the procedure, something goes catastrophically wrong. Bartsch receives a massive halothane overdose, 10 times the proper amount, due to an error with the anesthesia equipment. The anesthetic was administered through a vaporizer designed for a different drug. His cardiovascular system fails. His heart rate becomes erratic. His blood pressure drops. Medical staff immediately begin emergency protocols. They administer drugs, perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, do everything standard practice dictates. But despite all efforts, Jürgen Bartsch goes into cardiac arrest and dies on the operating table. An official autopsy and investigation determine the cause of death: complications from a halothane overdose during the castration operation. The doctor who accidentally killed him this way had killed other patients with similar errors before and was later sentenced to 9 months on probation. The case that began with an unwanted child in 1946 escalated through trauma and violence into murders that horrified a nation, sparked legal battles and psychiatric debates, ends on an operating table with a medical error. The bunker was sealed with concrete immediately after forensic work concluded in 1966. Today, decades later, the hillside shows no trace of what happened there. Grass and bushes have reclaimed the landscape. Nothing marks the spot where 4 children died and a 5th barely escaped. The families of Klaus Jung, Peter Fuchs, Ulrich Kalweis, and Manfred Grassmann carried their grief for the rest of their lives. Some never spoke publicly about what happened. Others became advocates for victims' rights and changes in how the justice system protects children. None ever received the closure they deserved. Peter Fries, the boy who escaped by burning through his bindings, lived with the trauma of that day for the rest of his life. He gave crucial testimony that helped convict his attacker. What happened to him afterwards remains private, as it should be. The case of Jürgen Bartsch had lasting impacts on German society. It forced a national conversation about how to handle juvenile offenders who commit extremely serious crimes. It raised questions about the age of criminal responsibility, the potential for rehabilitation, and the balance between protecting society and offering chances for redemption. Legal precedents established by his case still influence German law today, marking the first conviction in German history to include the psychosocial background of the defendant to set down the sentence. The case also fundamentally changed attitudes about child safety. The notion that children could safely wander fairgrounds unsupervised became far less common. Parents became more aware that predators don't always look dangerous, that someone polite and normal might harbor horrific intentions. Society learned that evil doesn't announce itself with obvious signs. In criminal psychology, the Bartsch case became a subject of extensive study. His letters and psychiatric evaluations provided researchers with rare insights into the development of violent sexual offenders. The case contributed to understanding how adverse early experiences, abandonment, institutional care, physical and sexual abuse might contribute to later violence, though never excusing it. But all the analysis, all the legal precedents, all the psychiatric insights cannot change one fundamental reality: 4 boys are dead. Klaus Jung never celebrated his 9th birthday. Peter Fuchs never finished school. Ulrich Kalweis never became whatever he might have become. Manfred Grassmann's life ended at 12. Nothing that happened afterwards gives them back what was taken. And one question haunts this entire story. What if the police had taken Reinhard Beck's complaint seriously in June 1961? What if they had searched that bunker when Jürgen Bartsch was 15 and had attacked only once? What if someone had recognized the warning signs and intervened before it became a pattern, before it became a series, before it became a tragedy? The warning was there. A father recognized danger and tried to raise the alarm. He provided names, locations, specific details. He did everything right. The system failed to listen. That failure cost 4 children their lives. We can analyze why. Insufficient training, lack of interjurisdictional communication, societal assumptions that such crimes were rare in post-war Germany, the tendency to believe polite teenagers from good families over accusers. We can point to specific decisions that, in retrospect, were clearly catastrophic mistakes. But none of that analysis brings back Klaus Jung, Peter Fuchs, Ulrich Kahlweis, or Manfred Grassmann. They remain forever young in photographs their families still treasure, frozen at 8, 13, 12, and 12. They never got to grow up, fall in love, have families of their own, pursue careers, experience the fullness of life that was their birthright. The story of Jürgen Bartsch is over. It ended in an operating room in 1976, but the lessons from that story continue. Every time authorities investigate suspicious behavior more thoroughly, every time a parent trusts their instincts that something isn't right, every time society chooses to take warnings seriously rather than dismissing them as overreactions, the memory of those 4 boys serves a purpose. This is not a story with a satisfying ending. There is no redemption, no justice that feels adequate, no closure that brings peace. There is only the cold fact of 4 murdered children, 1 boy who barely escaped, and a system that had a chance to prevent it all and chose not to act. That is what remains. That is what we must remember. Not to sensationalize evil, but to understand that preventing the next tragedy requires taking the first warning seriously before it becomes too late, before more innocent lives are lost. Klaus, Peter, Ulrich, and Manfred deserved better. We cannot give them back their futures, but we can honor their memory by learning from the failures that cost them everything. Bartsch died on the operating table. Was it justice or tragedy? What is your opinion? Share your thoughts in the comments.